All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to watch me talk a little bit here about Beast Coast fishing. My name is Sean Snover. I am the founder of Reel Nothern Bass. It's a YouTube channel based right here in the Northeast. I live in southern New Hampshire. The entire premise of our channel is to educate while hopefully kind of being entertaining, but not obnoxious. Just me and my buddy Andrew, we go out, we have fun, but we share absolutely everything that we learn along the way specific to New England. While I live in New Hampshire, we travel all over. We cover water from Maine, New Hampshire, a lot of Vermont, New York, a lot of Massachusetts, Connecticut. Haven't been to Rhode Island yet, but we'll get there. And a lot of what we do is just sharing the nuances of everything that we learn while also diving into the specifics of specific techniques. What I wanted to showcase today a little bit and talk about was Beast Coast fishing specifically. They're soft plastics, but the versatility that they can have with that. One of the things I like to try to be is efficient when I go out on the water. And in order to do that, it's a lot easier if I can find one or two baits that can do 3 or 4 things each. That's why I want to showcase Beast Coast, because they are one of the best examples of something that can be done. You can take a bait like what I'm going to start with, the Flippin' Delight, which was initially intended to be just a jig trailer or something for Texas rigging, and showcase several other techniques that it excels at, so that just to prove that point that you can do a lot with very little in the water, get the most bang for your buck. So you're not just buying every color and every size of one bait for one very specific technique, and then you have to go out and repeat that over and over and over again. Let's try and find something that can do a little bit of everything across multiple techniques. Makes it easier on the wallet, and it makes it easier on the water. You have to carry a lot less in your boat or your tackle bag. So I do want to focus on Flippin' Delight from Beast Coast first. For those that are not familiar, it is essentially just a jig trailer. It has 4 appendages. There's 2 in the center that essentially don't have any action to it whatsoever, but then there are the 2 primary crawl legs on the outside. What's unique about this bait is its ability to have a lot of action in the legs, but they will still stand straight up and present themselves. So if you're working it on the bottom, say a football head that naturally wants to stand and present your bait, so it's easier for a fish to see it on the bottom, the appendages are going to stand up, which you don't typically get out of a lot of baits that have as much action on the fall as the Flippin' Delight does. This is akin to the Rage Crop from Strike King as far as how much action you're going to get on the legs. But again, it has that benefit where the appendages are almost straight, so it's really going to stand and present itself. Most common way people fish this, I'll show off first, is a Texas rig. Texas rig, really straightforward. It's a great way to be able to quickly and effectively or precisely cover thick vegetation. You cover a lot of open water if you want to drag like a ribbon-tail worm, if you're going to do something a little different for a Texas rig. But really the benefit of this is its ability to get through cover easily, and they absolutely love this thing. But I'm going to see if I can do this without too much interruption from you guys. Give you an idea as to what the legs are doing. He's hungry. This is with a 1/2 ounce weight. Is that right in a good spot, or am I right in front of a bar? Do I weigh a little bit? Good. See if I can't yo-yo this a couple times so you can really see what the legs can do on this. And it's a 1/2 ounce weight, so you're going to get a lot of action out of it anyway. But the beauty of this too is it works really, really well. You get the action out of that even on a 3/8 ounce. So you don't have to throw it on something really heavy to get the most out of it. You can even on a 1/4 ounce head. The legs will still do what you want them to do. The heavier you go, the better it is, but it still works exceptionally well. I can barely see anything from here, but it feels like I'm getting hammered on by these fish as I drop it down. So you get an idea as to what those legs can do on just a standard Texas rig setup, which is, again, the most common way that people would typically use this. One of my favorite ways to get the most out of this is throwing on a bladed jig. It tends to do a lot better on this, moving it a little bit faster. So if I'm going to throw this on there, I throw it sideways. So as you're straight retrieving it, you want the legs vertical. You can go sideways if you want. I prefer to keep it vertical so it presents a more natural presentation, for lack of a better way to put it. The only reason I will go with this on a bladed jig, in this case specifically a jackhammer, versus say like a swim bait, which is what people typically would throw on there. I can get as much action out of the appendages that a swim bait does, but I feel like I have a little bit more versatility in how I can trim this out. A lot of people like to play with skirt length on jackhammer or even a swim jig, for example, if you want to make something a little bit more compact. I feel like I can make things a little bit easier to trim this down, shorten up the length, but I still get a broad presentation on the legs. So it's a little different. Not many people do it, but it works really, really well. This is a 3/8 ounce head. It typically works a little bit better on a 1/2 ounce, but 3/8 works just fine. We have done exceptionally well using this as a bladed jig trailer for the last 3 years. Well, since it came out, which I think was 3 years ago at this point. Hey, let go. You too. Depending upon, if you let this bait sit out a little bit and it starts to dry up a little bit, then that top leg tends to lose some of its action, but not always. For the most part, both legs do exactly what you want them to do. Get a nice kick out of it. And it especially looks good if you can give it a little flair. You don't always have to do it with the rod tip. You can do it with just the reel. Change your cadence a little bit. But it really goes to show the versatility of what those legs can do. Even just a little thump on the reel can really get them moving. Great trailer. You can do a lot of different things with this. Last but not least, I don't have a good example to show, plus it's going to be a little bit hard on the bottom. Works phenomenal as just a regular jig trailer. You can leave it as it is, untrimmed. You don't take out the middle appendages, just leave it. Full body works on what I would consider a traditional jig. So if you go with like a Maxfield jig from Beast Coast Fishing, if you go with any of the football jigs you find from like Strike King, things like that, that's a full strands, full length skirt. It tends to be a high strand count. It's a big presentation. That fits that perfectly. If you go to something more finesse, say like the open water sniper from Beast Coast Fishing, it's a shorter length on the skirt. You can get either a 44 strand or a 22 strand skirt. I'll both trim the length on that a little bit, just on the body. I'll bring that down at 1/2 inch to 1 inch, depending upon what the skirt length is on the jig. And if I go to a lighter strand count, like the MB version of all the open water snipers, that's a 22 strand count from Beast Coast Fishing. That I will not only trim the length, but also trim up the sides. So I'll streamline it, take it from that hourglass shape, and I'll bring it right up the sides. So it just fits that more subtle finesse presentation with it. And it doesn't impact the action of the legs whatsoever. It just dresses up everything nicely so it's kind of uniform across the board. That's what I really like about the Flippin' Delight, again from Beast Coast Fishing. A lot of versatility in that. Going along the same lines, but something a little bit bigger, is the Miyagi from Beast Coast Fishing. So for my swim bait anglers, or those that are looking to get into it, this is kind of like a gateway swim bait for me. It's 4 3/4 inches. It's got a relatively big body to it. It's got a really nice action on it. And it can be fished one of several different ways. It is primarily meant for throwing it on a weighted belly hook. There is a pocket that is molded into the middle of the belly, so that with that belly weight hook on the the belly weight on your hook, when a fish bites it and it collapses down, it basically splits open and collapses and folds around the weight. So it gets completely out of the way, really gets the whole gap on that hook to work for you. You get really, really good hook set penetration and high hookup ratio on it. But there's also enough body along the top of the bait, going along the back top side of this, that if you wanted to throw a jackhammer or a swim jig head right across the top, there's enough meat here that the moment you put it on there, it doesn't tear because it's paper thin left. There's plenty of material, so you can do this any way you want. This jackhammer is a little beat up, so I apologize for its less than stellar appearance, but one of my favorite things to do pre-spawn and post-spawn, and even middle of summer when I'm out in a deeper bite and I know that the bass are down there feeding on like perch or something like that in the grass, I like to throw a bigger presentation. This bait, specifically the Miyagi, works extremely well because of the formulation on it. Cold water, warm water, doesn't matter. You're still gonna get the same action out of those legs and it works phenomenal. This is a big presentation, but even with how big that body is, this is way bigger than what typically someone would throw on a bladed jig, and it still works great. Let's see if I can't get it to at least swim a little bit. That's just on a 3/8 head. It works a little bit better on a 1/2 ounce, but on a 3/8 works just fine. and I can just slow roll it, and I'm still gonna get the action out of that tail. So even though I'm putting it on something that is essentially potentially hindering its ability to just work the tail on its own, it still presents itself very, very well for this. To me, it truly speaks to how versatile this bait can be, that it doesn't just have to be thrown on a naked belly-weighted beast hook, or it doesn't have to be thrown on a naked football jig. You can throw it on the swim jig with the skirt. You can throw it on a bladed jig like a jackhammer, and it works exceptionally well. Some of our best days we've had in the spring, especially pre-spawn, is on this exact combo. But color options vary. It's either going to be like a perch pattern or a straight fire crawl like I had on the other setup. You can throw that on a naked swim jig, naked football jig, skirted jig, doesn't matter. That bait will work from ice out to ice in again because it plays really, really nice at any water temperature. Some baits tend to be a lot happier and work at their best in either really warm water or really cold water. The Miyagi does it in all of it. It's just a phenomenal all-around bait. If you're looking for something a little bit bigger that has that universal ice out to ice in application, that's as good as it's going to get. Let's do. One of the other new baits that Beast Coast has released relatively recently is their slow flow. So this is a very small swim bait. 2.85 inches and 3.8 inches. Where it excels is what the name implies. It is called the slow flow for a reason. The tail on this still kicks like a champ when you are crawling it as slow as possible on a really, really light jig head. For you anglers out there that are either extensively already fishing out in cold water, you're talking 45 degrees or below consistently, people that fish right till ice in or immediately after ice out where you're in the high 30s, mid to high 30 water temperature. This is the absolute best swim bait you can throw. That doesn't mean that's the only time to throw it. Because of how easy the tail is able to kick, there's a number of different ways that you can throw it. Throwing a swim bait on a drop shot, there's nothing new to that. There's plenty of people that do this. The benefit about this is because of how slow the bait goes, you can do what I would call like power dragging. So you can throw your drop shot out, long cast, get it to the bottom, 3/8 ounce, ½ ounce drop shot weight, so you know what's on the bottom, and you can either slow reel it or essentially do like long, slow drags. And you can do a really long, slow drag with this, keeping the weight on the bottom, fixed tight on your bait, and the tail's still gonna kick. So even though it's on a drop shot, it's almost like you're effectively swimming it on the bottom, but then you can kill it and it's still gonna present itself right there. We've had plenty of days where just throwing a drop shot down, watching fish after fish after fish. Turn around, nope, don't want anything to do with it. Okay, well maybe they need something a little more reactive. Throw out a different swim bait just on a ball jig and swim it and watch them chase it for a mile and they won't commit. That's where something like this comes in handy. Bomb that out, you're almost quickly dragging / slow swimming it along the bottom, letting the weight keep it at a fixed distance, then you can just kill it. Because it's on that drop shot, they're going to come up behind it and they're going to smoke it. So a little bit more niche application, but the point still stands to that versatility aspect that I'm talking about. So I could do the best I can to not get hung up on that rock, to kind of power drag this along. You can see how slow I'm going, and the tail should still be kicking. Oh, it's really hard because I'm like up on it versus out really far. Like, oh, out really far. And using the advantage of it being 150 feet away and really kind of sweeping my rod to get the most out of it. I have a hard time seeing, so I don't know if I've gone too fast, but I hope that proved that point on that. Now, really the whole point of that slow flow was to do one of two things exceptionally well. Throw it on a really, really light swim head, whether it be a ball jig or football head, swim jig head, doesn't matter, or throw it as a jig trailer. So same deal. If you're going out with the open water sniper from Beast Coast Fishing, more finesse cut style presentation on that jig, I live and die by that combo. Sniper, it's a finesse cut, lower strand count, really, really light action on the swim bait. It kills it. It just does phenomenal for these cold water fish this time of the year. But even in the summer, when everybody else, typically the majority of anglers out there are throwing, a ton of crazy action things. You know, they're throwing something maybe like a Kitech, or they're throwing Rage Tail for a swim bait from Strike King, or they're throwing other more violent craws. You can come in and throw them similar profile, but different action. You can slow it down. And as good as this combo is in really cold water, we've had exceptional luck with this even in the hot weather, because we're still doing something similar to everybody else, but it's just subtly different enough from everybody else as well that we're just giving them something a little bit different, but still in the right realm of where you want to be. But whether it's swimming it or dragging it, either way, it does phenomenal. But this is only a 1/4 ounce head, which is pretty light to be swimming. Actually, I take that back. Sorry, it's a 3/16 ounce. So even on a really, really light head, even if I went down to a 1/8 ounce or even a 1/16 ounce, going even lower, I've had phenomenal luck swimming this on a 1/20 ounce Ned head, which is incredibly light. But if you use that mushroom style Ned head versus that flat top one, it's still going to stand. The material composition on this it's not technically floating, but it will stand on itself if you throw it on a Ned head. And as long as you have that mushroom style head where it's rounded on the front, when you swim it, you're only getting the action in the bait. And then you can kill it, and it's going to fall right down, and it's going to stand on its head like it would any other Ned rig, but now you have a swim bait. So it's just a slightly different profile. You can swim it along, you're getting their attention, but they're not committing. Kill it. And you can either kill it a little high in the water column on tight line and let it pendulum down, or you just kill it on loose line and let it tank straight down. Sometimes that's enough to get them to commit. But even again, on a 1/20 ounce head, it's still going to do what it wants to do. That tail is going to swim really, really great at a very low speed. It doesn't take much. It's a killer light line application. I cannot recommend this thing enough. Again, it's a slow flow from Beast Coast Fishing. One of the things that I do a lot with this year on this specifically, I found it was really good on, was throwing it as an eco rig, which is kind of weird. Like, how are you going to set that up as an eco rig? You throw a little nail weight right up in the nose, throw an O-ring around it. You can use the same O-ring tool you use for your Senkos. Throw your hook around the O-ring. The benefit of that is the tail's still going to kick as it's going down, but if you weight it just right, especially on the 2.85, it will fall and spiral like a tube. So not only is the tail kicking the whole time, but you're covering a lot of the water as well as it spirals the whole way down. And as much as I thought that would do really well for smallmouth this year, I actually did exceptionally well doing that for largemouth. So, you know, that alone, you can throw that in underspin too. So many different ways you can present this that it still works really well. And that all came from something that was really just meant to be swam, as I showed you, on a regular jig, or just be a football jig trailer. But you can do absolutely anything you want with this. Last but not least, and this one is a little bit harder to actually demonstrate because it's so small and I don't have a good color that's going to be able to be easily seen in here, is the Magic Flick from Beast Coast Fishing. So the best I can do is I can hold it out so everybody kind of get a look at this. It's a minnow style bait. It was originally intended to be a phenomenal drop shot bait. 3.5 inch or 4 inch. They recently expanded upon their offerings, so now we have a 4 inch in quite a few colors. One of the best drop shot baits I've ever used. And it works really cold water. The earliest I'll start throwing a drop shot is usually kind of late spring when the water is closer to 50 degrees, we'll say high 40s. And I'll throw it right up until about the water comes back down to about mid 40s. And I switch to a Miyagi rig style presentation or a Ned rig. But this again was originally intended to be a phenomenal drop shot bait, and it does exactly that. But the formulation on this and the design on the tail allows for an incredible quivering action on the tail. So thinking about that, what other ways can I present this? I can take advantage of that, but in different ways. Works incredible on a Ned head, because as it's falling, you get a little bit of the quiver on the way down, and as it gets in on the bottom, you can almost, it's the silliest thing, but I call it power shimmying, where I've got it on the bottom, and I'm not hopping it, I'm not necessarily dragging it, I'm in between the two, where I'm kind of bouncing the line as I'm slowly pulling it along. And the bait doesn't really get off the bottom, but it just kind of looks like it's shimmying and dancing as I go, as I drag it along. But it's staying down. So if there's a fish that's honed in on it, their nose down, they're looking at it, I am taking advantage of the best aspect of this, that quivering action in the tail, and that's usually enough. If they're not going to eat a TRD that just sits there, and they're not going to chase something like a little swim bait, you're crawling along the bottom, then this sits in that in-between spot. And it's a drop shot weight, but throwing on a Ned rig, I can do that. Then when I get into the colder months, 45-degree water and colder, I love fishing a Miyagi rig. If nobody's familiar with that is, that's very much vertical fishing. You can cast it out and like tight line it back to the boat, but for the most part, any hook that the eyelet to the hook shank is 90 degrees, and a small bait like that, if I can do this, when you hold it, it's going to sit almost perfectly perpendicular in the water column. It's going to look like a little bait fish just sitting there doing nothing. Go away. I need to show them. I can't be hooking you. But because he has so many different colors, I can do this effectively with, depending on, okay, we're good. I'm not going to do that again. Depending upon where you go, especially in the Northeast, there is an insane variety of bait fish, right? And you match the hatch, and that's the best way to have success for you during the day. So if I'm out in a place that's really heavy on yellow perch, it's cold water, they're all moving up, and they're not really chasing anything, I can hang this little minnow style bait directly over their head. If I do it with the right kind of Ned head, I can do both. I can drop it down, hold it 10 feet over their head and try and get them to come up to eat it, or I can just drop it straight down the bottom and get them to come in. I'm still getting the advantage of that tail design to do both things. If I hold it over their head, it's got a little quiver to the tail, but it's not moving, so they'll come up, they can take their time, they can eat it, or if you want to get a little more aggressive, drop it down. But, if they're feeding heavily on yellow perch, he's got a color for that. If it's heavy on smelts, he's got a color for that. Same deal if they're fishing heavy on alewife, white perch, it doesn't matter. I can do that, hang that bait over the head and match the hatch perfectly. It really helps with that in mind. You catch a smallmouth, it comes up, it starts burping up bait, try and grab one and match that to what you're throwing. I've done that more times than I can count. But it's the quickest, easiest way to match exactly what it is that they're eating, especially if what they ate was fresh. But that's, again, the Magic Flick from Beast Coast Fishing. Very versatile bait. It's still my favorite thing to use on a drop shot, but I use it on a ton of things. Ned rig, it's been doing really well for me. Miyagi is still my go-to bait for it. I cannot recommend it enough. For anybody interested in any of these things, you can find them. They're right over here. You can't miss it. They got one of the biggest banners here in the store, and they've got everything I talked about. Other than that, thank you everybody for listening to me rant and ramble a little bit about Beast Coast Fishing. I hope that was informative. You can follow us on YouTube and find us. It's Reel Nothern Bass, reel like the fishing reel. Thank you all very much.